34,000 feet over the Siberian wilderness, an Airbus A310 is rolling 45 degrees, 60 degrees, now 90 degrees on its side. The autopilot's lateral channel has silently disconnected. Nobody in the cockpit knows. The captain isn't in his seat. He's standing behind the center pedestal, watching his 15-year-old son Eldar sit in the captain's chair, hands on the control wheel. The first officer is pushed all the way back in his seat and can't reach out the pedals properly. An off-duty pilot occupies the jump seat. And in the back, a 12-year-old girl has just finished her turn flying the aircraft. The aircraft continues its turn. The bank angle increases. Still no warning, no alarm. But then, the nose starts dropping and G-forces build, pressing everyone into their seats. The captain realizes something's terribly wrong. "Get out! Get out!" the captain screams to his son, but he can't move from the chair. The G-forces have him pinned. How does a father's pride in his work lead to a huge tragedy? Today, I'm going to tell you the crazy story of Aeroflot 593.
I am Captain Jack Mercer. What you're going to watch now is the story from the perspective of a pilot who has lived and seen a lot in 25 years of experience. Welcome aboard.
It's March 22nd, 1994. Evening at Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport. Aeroflot Flight 593 is preparing for the long haul from Moscow to Hong Kong. 13 hours and 39 minutes of flying time. That's a marathon flight, you know. So long that regulations require at least 3 pilots on board so they can rotate and get rest during the journey. The aircraft? An Airbus A310-304. Brand new by airline standards, only 2.5 years old. It had served 846 flight cycles and accumulated 5,375 airframe flight hours. Most of those hours were on this exact route. The plane was inspected before entering service and showed no deficiencies. Technically, it was in excellent shape. Now let me tell you about the crew, because their backgrounds are going to matter. The pilot in command is Andrei Viktorovich Danilov, a fairly experienced 40-year-old captain. He's been flying the Airbus A310 for about 2 years, giving him around 950 hours on type. His previous experience was largely on the Tupolev 134, a Soviet-built aircraft. And yes, this detail is important, because Soviet aircraft were less sophisticated than Western planes. The Airbus represented a huge technological leap for Russian pilots in the early 1990s, and they were still getting accustomed to its advanced systems. Keep this information in mind. The first officer, Igor Vasilievich Piskarov, is 33 years old. He joined Aeroflot about 2 years prior and has amassed 440 hours on the A310. Reasonably experienced, but again, all his prior training was on Soviet aircraft. The relief captain, Yaroslav Vladimirovich Kudrinsky, is an experienced 39-year-old with 907 hours on the A310. On this particular flight, he's doing something special. For the first time ever, he's traveling internationally with his 2 teenage children, 12-year-old Yana and 15-year-old Eldar. He's excited to show them the world, to share his work with them. It's sad to think that they have no idea that this fact is going to end in tragedy today. The rest of the crew consists of 9 cabin crew members. There are 63 passengers on board, many of them airline employees using company discount fares to travel to Hong Kong. The cabin capacity is 189, so the plane is only about 1/3 full.
The pilots go through their pre-flight procedures. They check the weather. It's fine en route, no turbulence expected, nothing unusual. They review the technical logbook. It's completely clean. No open defects, no mechanical issues. Everything looks perfect for a routine overnight flight. They make their way down to the aircraft. As they're preparing, another pilot arrives, an off-duty Aeroflot pilot named Vladimir Makarov. He's traveling as a passenger, also using the employee discount. He asks if it would be possible to sit in the cockpit during the flight on the jump seat. The crew agrees. Remember, this is 1994, before September 11th. The rules about cockpit access weren't as stringent as they are today. Having another pilot in the cockpit, not unusual at all. The crew boards the passengers, completes their preparations, and pushes back from the gate.
It's 8:39 p.m. local time. Flight 593 lifts off from runway 25 right at Sheremetyevo Airport. The takeoff is smooth. The aircraft makes a right-hand turn toward the northeast and climbs to 30,000 feet, where they level off for about 27 minutes before continuing up to their cruise altitude of 34,000 feet. The flight proceeds normally for the first 4 hours. They're flying over the dark skies of central Russia, vast stretches of wilderness below, stars above. The cockpit is calm, pure routine, Now, 12:26 a.m., about 4 hours into the flight, it's time for the pilot in command to take his rest break. He leaves the cockpit, heads back into the passenger cabin, and settles down to get some sleep. The relief captain, the 39-year-old with his kids on board, takes the left seat. From this point forward, I'm going to call him the captain because he's now the pilot flying. He's sitting in the captain's chair, hands on the controls. Well, technically the autopilot is doing the flying, but he's in command, right? The first officer remains in the right seat as pilot monitoring. He's handling radio communications with air traffic control, keeping an eye on the instruments. It's around this time that the captain gets an idea. He's proud of his work, like we all pilots are, understand? He's proud of this incredible machine he flies, and his 2 children are sitting back in the passenger cabin, probably bored on this long overnight flight. So his idea? He invites them into the cockpit. I mean, think about it. If you were a pilot and your kids had never seen you at work, wouldn't you want to show them? Of course you would, right? And it's 1994. This wasn't strictly against the rules. Lots of pilots brought family members into the cockpit to show them around. It was very, very common.
So Yana and Eldar come forward. They step into the cockpit, eyes wide, looking at all the instruments, the switches, the glowing displays. Probably it's like stepping into a spaceship for them. The captain is beaming with pride. Then he thinks, why not make this even more special? So, it's 12:43 a.m., and the captain asks his daughter Yana if she'd like to sit in the pilot's chair and fly the aircraft. Yana's face probably lights up. Yes, absolutely. Now, here's where things start to deviate from standard procedure. The captain doesn't hand over controls to the first officer. Instead, he gets out of the captain's seat and positions himself behind the center pedestal. Still technically pilot flying, still in command, but he's not in the proper position anymore. Yana climbs into the seat. She looks up at the massive control wheel in front of her. She asks her dad if he can raise the seat a little so she can see better. He adjusts it for her. Let me be clear about something, my friend. Having the kids in the cockpit, that was allowed. But what's happening now? This crosses a line, As pilot in command and pilot flying, you're not supposed to leave the pilot seat for any reason except strictly safety-related or operational issues. And if you do leave your seat, you must hand over controls to the pilot monitoring, who then becomes pilot flying. Understand? But that didn't happen here. Instead, the captain got out of the chair and let an outsider, someone with zero training, zero experience, sit in the active pilot seat of an aircraft in flight. Under no circumstances this is allowed. Not then, not now, not ever. The first officer is watching this happen. He's pulled his seat all the way back. He's only 160 centimeters tall, so with the seat in that position, he can't properly reach the pedals. It would be difficult for him to hand fly the aircraft from that position. And soon, you will understand why I'm mentioning this simple detail, my friend. Just keep watching. The captain tells Yana to put her hands on the control wheel. She does. Then he reaches up and switches the autopilot mode from navigation, which follows the pre-programmed route, to heading mode, which simply flies whatever direction he sets on the heading selector. He turns the heading bug more than 15 degrees to the left. The autopilot initiates a 20-degree bank turn to the left. Since Yana has her hands on the controls, it feels to her like she's actually making the turn, but it's just a trick from the captain to make her believe she's flying the plane. Once the turn has been going for a while, the captain moves the heading bug back to the right, initiating a right-hand turn. Once they're more or less back on their original track, he re-engages navigation mode. The aircraft continues on its route. During this whole maneuver, Yana is only resting her hands on the controls. She's not applying any force. The autopilot is doing everything. But again, it feels real to her. Understand?
She stays in the seat for about 7 minutes, looking around curiously at all the instruments.
Now it's 12:52 a.m. and she makes room for her older brother. Eldar is eager. He's 15 years old enough to be seriously interested in aviation. He wants his turn. As the siblings switch places, the first officer gets on the radio. He calls up Novosibirsk Control, gives them a position report, and informs them they'll reach waypoint SAKIR at 12:59 a.m., about 8 minutes away. Unfortunately, my friend, they'll never make that waypoint. So Eldar settles into the captain's seat. Makarov, the off-duty pilot on the jump seat, asks if he can take a picture of the boy. Eldar agrees, grinning with pride. The captain intends to do exactly the same maneuver with Eldar as he did with Yana earlier. Simple. Just a little turn to the left, then back to the right. Make the kid feel like he's flying. But before the captain can start the maneuver, Eldar turns to his father and asks, "Can I actually turn the yoke?" The captain responds, "Yeah, you can." Okay, my friend, this is where alarm bells should be going off. I mean, I understand he wants the kids to have fun and be excited about their father's work, but do you feel the same I'm feeling right now? Lines are being seriously crossed inside the cockpit. But the captain doesn't see the danger. He reaches up and engages heading mode again. He turns the heading bug more than 15 degrees to the left, initiating the autopilot's turn. But this time, Eldar is actually applying force to the control wheel. Quite a bit of force. You can see this later in the flight data recorder because there's asymmetry between the left and right ailerons as he pushes. Initially, though, this doesn't impact the autopilot. It's still in control. Once the left turn has been going for a while, the captain reaches over and moves the heading bug to the right to start a right-hand turn back toward their original course. Eldar follows along, applying even more pressure to the wheel as he turns right. Now as the autopilot gets closer to its intended heading, it starts leveling off the wings to maintain that heading. But Eldar keeps pressure on the yoke. He wants to keep turning right. And here's where you need to understand something critical about how the Airbus A310 autopilot works. When the autopilot is engaged in these advanced modes, it has full authority to control the aircraft in all three axes: pitch, roll, and yaw. A trained pilot would never try to counteract the autopilot unless there's a non-normal situation. If the autopilot isn't doing what it's supposed to, the pilot can intervene. And when that happens, the autopilot is designed to give authority back to the pilot.
In most aircraft, this causes the autopilot to disconnect completely. It's abundantly obvious. You get an oral warning, the autopilot disconnect light illuminates, everyone knows immediately. But the Airbus A310 has a different feature. Do you remember when I mentioned the Russian pilots being trained on Soviet aircraft? Yes, now they don't fully understand the difference. And as Eldar maintains his right-hand turn input, and the autopilot tries to level off, the autopilot senses resistance. It interprets this as the pilot wanting to take over. So it disconnects only the lateral channel, the part that controls the aircraft's turning. The autopilot is still engaged. It doesn't give any oral warning. It doesn't give any visual warning that would be obvious to the pilots. It still controls the aircraft's altitude, but it has now relinquished control of the lateral axis, the turning. For a trained pilot who's actively flying, this decoupling would definitely be felt. If you're turning against the autopilot and this happens, you'd suddenly feel a difference in the force feedback on the controls. But Eldar has no idea what he's doing. He has no training, no knowledge of this system. He doesn't notice the change. And the first officer, he might also be lightly following along on his control wheel, but he doesn't notice either. He might think any difference in force feedback is just from Eldar's inputs on the other side. The captain, standing behind the pedestal, doesn't notice anything either. So none of the three pilots, and certainly not the teenager at the controls, realize that the lateral autopilot has just disconnected. The aircraft continues its right-hand turn, past the point where it should have leveled off and followed its original route. The bank angle is slowly increasing because there's still a little bit of force being applied to the wheel toward the right. There's still no indication in the cockpit that the lateral channel is disengaged. But here's the thing, my friend. None of the pilots seem to be monitoring the aircraft properly. The captain has looked away and is engaged in a conversation with his daughter, Yana. The aircraft keeps turning. The bank angle increases past 20 degrees. And then the 15-year-old Eldar speaks up about it. Why is it turning? The first officer looks over at him. Is it turning by itself? Eldar responds, yeah.
Makarov, the pilot on the jump seat, speaks up. "It's turning into the area, guys." The first officer looks down at his navigation display. Yeah, it's reaching the area, the holding area. Now, you might be wondering, why would the pilots think they're entering a holding area? They haven't programmed one. It's not on the route. They haven't been instructed by ATC to hold. Well, here's what's happening. During flight testing of the A310, engineers discovered that when the aircraft turns away from its intended route, without following the autopilot, it can display a false track line on the navigation display. The system is basically suggesting, well, you're turning, so maybe you want to go this way. The suggested track can appear as a straight line or a circular line, like a holding pattern.
So, when the pilots look down at their displays and see what looks like a holding pattern, they think, oh, maybe that's what's happening. But it's not. It's a false indication caused by the aircraft turning away from its programmed route while the lateral autopilot is disconnected. And here's the critical error. All of the pilots are now looking at their navigation displays, trying to figure out what's going on with this holding pattern. None of them is monitoring the actual aircraft attitude, the bank angle, the pitch, the altitude. The aircraft continues banking to the right. It passes 30 degrees, which is the autopilot's limit. It passes 45 degrees, what we consider a steep turn, and it keeps going. But there's still no aural warning in the cockpit. Remember how I said the autopilot hasn't fully disengaged? It's still trying to maintain altitude. The only way it can do that as the bank angle increases is by pulling back on the elevator and changing the angle of the horizontal stabilizer. It's commanding nose up to try to keep the plane level. But as the aircraft banks more and more, it becomes harder and harder for the autopilot to maintain altitude. When the rank passes about 45 degrees, the aircraft starts descending. And because the elevator is deflected upward, trying to maintain altitude, the aircraft is also subjecting everyone on board to increasing G-forces. Past 45 degrees of bank, the G-forces reach about 1.6, 60% more than normal. Everyone feels heavier, pressed into their seats. This is likely what finally gets the pilots to look at the primary flight display to see what's actually happening. So, the first voice to speak up is Makarov, the jump seat pilot. "Hey, guys." That's quickly followed by the captain's voice. "Urgent now. Hold it. Hold the control column. Hold it." It's very likely that this command from his father causes Eldar to physically grip the control column tightly. That would be the logical response for someone who's not a trained pilot. Hold it means hold on to it, right? But what the captain actually meant was for the pilots to stop the bank angle, to hold it level and start bringing it back to the left. The first officer understands this correctly. He starts applying left input to his control wheel, trying to level the aircraft. But Eldar, following his father's direct order, is holding the yoke firmly. As the first officer applies left aileron, he encounters resistance.
And here's where another feature of the Airbus flight control system comes into play. If the control yoke becomes blocked on one side for any reason, it's critical that the other pilot can still control the aircraft. The way this works is that when you apply enough force, you can physically separate the two control systems from each other. But when that happens, the pilot who still has control can only command part of the flight controls. Only some of the ailerons and spoilers respond. This is likely what's happening now. The first officer is trying to turn left, but Eldar is holding the controls as his father commanded. The first officer could only control part of the wing surfaces. It becomes sluggish, difficult. On the flight data recorder, you can even see the first officer momentarily reverse his input, turning right briefly, just to check if something's wrong with the flight controls. But when he does that, the bank angle just increases even more. The truth is, it probably doesn't matter much at this point. The aircraft is now at an almost 90-degree bank angle, flying on its side. And remember, the autopilot's vertical channel is still engaged, still trying to maintain altitude by deflecting the elevator almost fully upward. This means the angle of attack has exceeded the critical angle. The wings are stalled. When the wings are stalled, you might not have any aileron control anyway. Interestingly, for the first few seconds of this stall, there's no audible stall warning in the cockpit. The aircraft is definitely buffeting, shaking violently, which is a clear physical signal that they're in a stall. But the audible warning is being overridden by other alerts, the autopilot disconnect warning and the altitude deviation warning, as the aircraft descends away from its assigned altitude. It takes about 4 seconds before the stall warning finally sounds in the cockpit. For the next 21 seconds, the captain, still standing behind the center pedestal, is screaming, "The other way, turn left!" The first officer is also yelling, "The other way, the other way!"
I presume they're both shouting at Eldar, who's holding the controls for dear life. Okay, let me tell you what should happen right now. When your aircraft is in a stall, you need to recover from the stall first. That means disconnecting the autopilot, pushing the nose forward to unload the wings and reduce the angle of attack. Only then, once the wings are producing lift again, can you start leveling the bank and recovering to wings level. But this doesn't happen. The aircraft continues in its stalled condition, descending rapidly in a very steep right-hand bank. It's obvious from the cockpit voice recorder that the pilots have lost situational awareness. They're reacting, but not correctly. One of the reasons they didn't react properly? At this time, Aeroflot pilots received no training in the simulator on how to deal with high-altitude upset recovery and stall procedures. They simply hadn't practiced this scenario.
Now, it's 12:58 a.m. and things are about to get even worse, my friend. Stick with me. The aircraft is in an almost 90-degree right bank with the nose pitched down 20 degrees. It's descending rapidly. As the autopilot finally disconnects completely, overwhelmed by the forces being applied to the controls, the high angle of attack protection system kicks in. This system is designed to force the nose down even further to unload the wings and recover from a stall. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. But the result is terrifying. The pitch attitude changes from -20 degrees to -50 degrees. The aircraft is now diving almost straight down. The descent rate hits almost 39,000 feet per minute. That's 200 meters per second. The autothrottle is still engaged and set to thrust hold. The speed increases rapidly, passing 400 knots. 12:56:18 a.m., and the first officer suddenly exclaims, "To the left there is the ground." He's regained his situational awareness. He can see how bad this is. Instinctively, he pulls back hard on his yoke. The elevator goes to full deflection. The G-forces spike dramatically. The flight data recorder shows 4.7 Gs at the peak. That's nearly 5 times normal gravity. It would have likely caused structural deformation of the aircraft. These G-forces make it extremely hard to move inside the cockpit. The captain is screaming at his son, "Get out! Get out!" But Eldar is completely pinned in the seat by the G-forces. He can't move. The first officer, still sitting far back in his seat, can barely reach the pedals, but he can reach the throttle levers. Seeing the airspeed climbing dangerously high, he pulls the throttles back to idle. This, combined with the steep pitch up from his control input, causes the speed to plummet. Within a few seconds, the aircraft decelerates from 400 knots down to only 100 knots. During this maneuver, the G-forces ease off slightly. Eldar can finally get out of the seat. The captain starts moving toward his position, but as they're changing places, one of them pushes the left rudder pedal. In the situation they're now in, low speed, full back elevator, left bank, and suddenly a kick of left rudder, they've created the perfect conditions for a spin entry. The aircraft immediately enters a right-hand spin, pitching the nose down again to almost a vertical dive. At this point, the G-forces drop to zero, and everyone on board experiences weightlessness, floating in their seats.
Now 12:57:11 a.m., and the captain finally gets back into his seat. The aircraft is actually stabilized somewhat. It's in a 20-degree left bank and a 20-degree nose-down attitude. Still not good, but recoverable. If the pilots would just let the controls go, return the elevator to neutral, the aircraft might stabilize at speed, and they could recover the situation. But instead, the elevator is pulled back again to maximum deflection. The aircraft pitches up and starts losing speed. It's 12:57:47 a.m., and someone pushes the left rudder again. This creates the conditions for another spin. The aircraft starts rotating at a higher and higher rate. The aircraft is now at only 1,000 feet above the ground, but it's too late. Even though the pilots managed to stop the rotation, the aircraft is too low and too slow. So, at 12:58:01 a.m., the final moment comes. Only 3 minutes and 15 seconds after Eldar first sat in the pilot's seat, Aeroflot Flight 593 crashes into the foothills of the Kuznetsk-Alatau mountain range. The entire upset, from the first signs of trouble to impact, took only 2 minutes and 25 seconds. All 75 people on board die instantly, as the aircraft slams into the snow-covered mountains and disintegrates. It took several hours for the crash location to be found. Rescue workers had to travel by helicopter because of the remote location. The wreckage was scattered across the mountainside. Bodies were found up to a mile away from the main impact site. The snow around the crash site was soaked with jet fuel. Due to the remoteness and bad weather, it took 7 days to recover all the bodies. So, what actually caused this tragedy? Yes, it seems that you already know, but what you see here is just the top of the iceberg, my friend. But let me break this down from a pilot perspective, and you will see that there's more than what you're thinking. Keep watching. First, the fundamental error. The captain allowed his 15-year-old son to sit in the active pilot seat during flight. This wasn't just bending the rules, it was breaking them completely. No untrained person should ever occupy the pilot seat when an aircraft is operating. The captain also left his position without properly handing over controls to the first officer. These decisions set everything in motion.
Second, the Airbus A310's autopilot design. When Eldar applied enough force to the control wheel, the autopilot interpreted this as the pilot wanting to take control, so it disconnected only the lateral channel, the part controlling turns, while maintaining control of altitude. This is a feature that exists in Western aircraft, but was completely foreign to these Russian pilots trained on Soviet planes. Now the critical problem. Disconnecting just the lateral channel produced no aural warning, no obvious visual alert. A trained Airbus pilot would have felt the change in control forces, but Eldar had no training. And the first officer, following along on his control wheel, didn't notice either because he thought any force changes were from Eldar's inputs. Think about it. If there had been a clear warning, a loud beep, a flashing light, anything, the pilots would have immediately known something was wrong. They would have taken control, leveled the wings, and continued safely to Hong Kong, right? Third, the lack of monitoring. For about 20 seconds, while the aircraft was banking away from its route, none of the 3 professional pilots in that cockpit were watching the primary flight instruments. They were all looking at the navigation display, confused by the false holding pattern indication. Basic monitoring would have caught this immediately. Fourth, the recovery attempts. When the pilots finally realized they were in trouble, their reactions made things worse. The first officer couldn't reach the pedals properly from his rearmost seat position. Eldar held the controls when told to hold it, creating resistance against the first officer's recovery inputs. The pilots had never trained for high-altitude upset recovery in the simulator. They simply didn't know the correct procedure. And what is the proper recovery in this scenario, Captain Jack? Disconnect autopilot, push forward to stop the stall, then gently level the bank. Instead, they pulled back hard, entered a dive, then overcorrected into a climb that caused a secondary stall and spin. And fifth, the timing. That inadvertent rudder input during the seat change, first entering the spin, then again at low altitude, sealed their fate. By the time they got the aircraft somewhat stabilized, they were below 1,000 feet with insufficient altitude to complete recovery.
So what failed was human judgment and a lack of understanding of the aircraft's automation systems. Aeroflot initially denied children were in the cockpit, but when the cockpit voice recording was leaked to the press, the truth became undeniable. The deputy head of the Interstate Aviation Committee stated that the tragedy occurred when the crew commander's daughter and son were in the cockpit, and their actions, combined with the uncoordinated reaction of the pilots, led to the disaster. So let's talk about the most important thing here. What did the aviation industry learn from Flight 593? Well, this tragedy led to significant changes in cockpit security, pilot training, and aircraft design. First, cockpit access rules were dramatically tightened. The investigation resulted in strict recommendations about who can access the cockpit and under what circumstances. While the September 11th attacks would later make these rules even stringent, Flight 593 was already pushing the industry toward limiting non-essential personnel from the flight deck during all phases of flight. Today, having untrained individuals in the pilot seat is absolutely prohibited worldwide. Second, regulations about when pilots can leave their seats were clarified and enforced. Pilots must remain in their assigned positions during critical phases of flight. If the pilot flying needs to leave their seat for any reason, formal control handover procedures must be followed, and the pilot monitoring becomes pilot flying. Third, upset recovery training became mandatory. Before this accident, many airlines, especially those transitioning from Soviet aircraft to Western jets, didn't provide comprehensive training on recovering from unusual attitudes in high-altitude stalls. Now, simulator training includes upset recovery as a core competency. Pilots practice recognizing the signs of an upset, the correct recovery technique, and how to avoid secondary stalls. Fourth, Airbus made critical changes to the A310 autopilot system. The investigation stressed that the aircraft had no warning when the lateral autopilot channel disconnected, a feature that violated internationally recommended practices. Airbus introduced proper audible warnings for partial autopilot disconnections. They also enhanced bank angle warnings and improved other system alerts to make pilots immediately aware when automation modes change. Fifth, the accident highlighted the importance of proper transition training when pilots move from one aircraft type to another, especially when switching between fundamentally different design philosophies like Soviet versus Western aircraft. Understanding your aircraft's automation and how it responds to pilot inputs is critical. Unfortunately, the tragedy of Flight 593 claimed 75 innocent lives, but their deaths drove improvements that have made aviation safer for everyone who flies today. I need to confess that this story breaks my heart every time, as a father, I understand that pilot. He just wanted to make his kids proud of him. Do you agree? Please let me know in the comments, okay? But at the end of the day, the truth is, rules exist for a reason, and in aviation, they're written in blood, my friend. All right, if you enjoyed today's episode, hit that like button and subscribe. And I would appreciate it if you share it with others who love aviation or good storytelling, or both. I'm Captain Jack Mercer. Thanks for flying with me today, and I'll see you next time.